In the early days of Young Sheldon, Georgie Cooper wasn't exactly the model big brother. Before he became the responsible family man that we now see in Georgie and Mandy's first marriage, Georgie used to be a bit of a delinquent. Not in a dangerous or a criminal way, but in that classic small-town teenage troublemaker kind of way. He was the kind of kid who skipped school, argued with teachers, and found himself constantly at odds with his father, George Sr., and while it might have seemed like simple rebellion, there was always more to it than that. From the very first seasons of Young Sheldon, Georgie was portrayed as the total opposite of his younger brother, Sheldon. Where Sheldon was a genius obsessed with science and rules, Georgie was street-smart, impulsive, and constantly looking for shortcuts. He wasn't academically inclined, but that didn't mean he wasn't clever. In fact, Georgie's kind of intelligence, practical, social, and entrepreneurial, is what kept him afloat even when he didn't fit into the academic mold. But as a teenager, he didn't yet understand how to channel that energy, and it often came out as defiance. One of the most telling parts of Georgie's early character arc was his strained relationship with authority. Whether it was his parents, teachers, or even church figures, Georgie always pushed back. He didn't like being told what to do, especially when he didn't see the logic behind it. That rebellious streak often made him seem like a delinquent, especially in contrast to Sheldon, who worshipped structure and precision. But Georgie's behavior was rooted in frustration. Living in Sheldon's shadow wasn't easy. Everyone around him celebrated his brother's brilliance, while Georgie's talents often went unnoticed. In a way, Georgie's delinquent phase was his form of resistance, his way of carving out an identity separate from Sheldon's. He might not have been a straight-A student, but he was charming, resourceful, and driven by a kind of survival instinct. When he dropped out of school to start working, it seemed reckless, but it was also the first real decision he made for himself. And that moment was important because it set the foundation for the man we see in Georgie and Mandy's first marriage. Another layer to Georgie's early delinquent behavior was his dynamic with his dad, George Sr. Their relationship was complicated, but deeply human. George Sr. wanted Georgie to be responsible, to avoid making the same mistakes he did. But Georgie, being young and stubborn, often saw his father's advice as criticism. That led to plenty of heated moments between them, moments that were both funny and painfully realistic. Georgie's tendency to act out came from wanting respect and independence, something every teenager struggles with at some point. But what makes Georgie's character arc so compelling is how much he grew from those rough beginnings. His rebelliousness eventually turned into resilience. The same traits that made him seem delinquent in his youth, his stubbornness, his boldness, and his willingness to take risks, became the same traits that allowed him to succeed later in life. When Georgie and Mandy's first marriage begins, we see a very different side of him. A man who's learned from his mistakes, who's trying to provide for his family, and who's doing everything he can to break free from the cycle of struggle he saw growing up. Looking back, it's actually quite heartwarming to see how far Georgie has come. In the early episodes of Young Sheldon, he was the classic teenage screw-up. He got in trouble at school, clashed with his parents, and seemed to lack direction. But as time went on, we started to see glimpses of maturity. Moments where he stepped up for his family, supported his mother after his father's death, and took on responsibilities far beyond his years. The loss of George Sr. was a huge turning point for Georgie. That tragedy forced him to grow up fast. Suddenly, he wasn't just the older brother. He was the man of the house. That kind of pressure can crush someone or make them stronger. For Georgie, it was both. It broke him down, but it also built him into the person he needed to become. The delinquent teen from Young Sheldon started to fade, replaced by someone more grounded and determined. Now, as we follow Georgie's story in Georgie and Mandy's first marriage, we can still see traces of that old rebellious spark. He's still the same guy who doesn't always follow the rules, who takes risks, and who learns lessons the hard way. But he's matured. He channels that energy into building a future for his family instead of running from responsibility. That's what makes his journey so relatable. He's not perfect, but he's real. It's also important to note how the writers used Georgie's early delinquency to highlight the family dynamic in Young Sheldon. Every member of the Cooper family had their struggles, but Georgie's were the most grounded in real-world teenage issues. He wasn't dealing with theoretical physics or existential questions. He was dealing with grades, money, and figuring out his place in a world that didn't seem built for him. That's something that resonated with a lot of viewers who saw themselves in Georgie's shoes. What's truly fascinating about Georgie's evolution is how it mirrors the broader themes of both Young Sheldon and The Big Bang Theory. In The Big Bang Theory, we meet an older Georgie who's successful, the owner of a tire business, but still carrying some resentment from his past. When Sheldon and Georgie finally reconcile in that show, we realize just how much pain was buried under Georgie's sarcasm and toughness. It all traces back to that young delinquent version of him who never quite felt seen. So when fans look back at Georgie's early days, calling him a delinquent isn't really about labeling him as bad. It's about recognizing the struggle he went through to become who he is. Georgie was a product of his environment, a kid trying to find his way in a family dominated by genius, religion, and expectation. His mistakes were stepping stones, not dead ends. And that's why watching him grow up has been one of the most rewarding arcs in the Young Sheldon universe. In the end, Georgie's story reminds us that not every path to success is straight. Some people stumble, fall, and mess up before they find their footing. Georgie did all of that. He wasn't a hero from the start, and he didn't need to be. His transformation from a misunderstood teen to a devoted husband and father is proof that growth is possible, even for those who start off on the wrong side of things. And maybe that's why so many fans root for him. Because Georgie Cooper, the one-time delinquent, represents second chances, the idea that our past doesn't define our future. He might have been the troublemaker of Young Sheldon, but he's also one of the best examples of redemption and resilience in the Big Bang Theory world. For more videos, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel.